We will start with Underworld back in '96 because it was a time when a lot of people were introduced to Underworld from the soundtrack of the film Trainspotting, which was a huge hit, and Born Slippy, their single from that movie, was huge on dance floors everywhere. I mean, you think around that time, think songs like Insomnia by Faithless or House of Pain's Jump Around a bit earlier than that. You know, there were certain tracks that were just being played everywhere on the dance floors, everywhere around the world. And I think even they got tired of playing it after a while. And there's no doubt it's a great track, you know, but like all pop music, it has a short shelf life. So the reason I'm starting on that track is because it's a great track, no doubt about it, but there's so much more to Underworld than that. So we'll move on. So if we rewind back from '96, the early '90s is a good place to start with Underworld, because at that time there was a lot of raving going on up and down the country, whether it was in clubs or on fields, you know, and a lot of it was illegal. You're not allowed to do it, and they got shut down. But it was so popular around that time. There was so much music trying to find itself, you know, from house to garage to jungle, which then was hardcore, which was then drum and bass. You know, R&B and hip hop was huge as well. So it was a really interesting time for underground music. And at that time, Underworld came out with the album, you know, Dubnobasswithmyheadman in '93. And it was a really groundbreaking album, and a lot of the tracks were really long, and they were one of the pioneers of doing that. I can't think of too many artists that were doing such long 10-minute tracks like Underworld were, and the album was very varied. You know, it was techno, but not like Tiesto kind of techno. It was much more diverse than that, you know, bringing flavors of dance music, breakbeat, house, even ambient, you know, and there was dark and light tracks in there. It was a brave album to do at the time because you couldn't put it in any category. And it's worth reminding ourselves that Carl and Rick both were from the design outfit Tomato, which is still going, which was a very cool design studio. It was a beautiful time, you know, with you know, when all you had was commercial radio, like the top 40 to go by. You know, aside from that, there was this whole world underground going on up and down the country, like I mentioned earlier. And this album, Dubnobasswithmyheadman, was part of that. You know, there was 10-minute tracks on there that wouldn't have been radio friendly. You know, so they were doing this out of the love for the music, and you know, they were causing a big buzz in the underground scene at that time. Back to '96, their second studio album, which is the second toughest in the Infants, which to me is where Underworld really found the sound that they're known for. Carl really stepped up with the lyrics, and they all stepped up with the production skills as well. It wasn't too dissimilar from before. It was up and down tempo. There was house in there, breakbeat, drum and bass, even ambient. Pearl's Girls is a great example of a drum and bass track. Really underrated in my opinion, but really ahead of its time. Yet they're not really known for drum and bass even. And you know, it was like unlike anything else around at that time, you know, so it was no wonder that Jose Padilla included the track Second Hand on the Ibiza Chill Out compilation albums, and yet, you know, elsewhere they're being played in clubs around Ibiza, so they were really finding a diverse audience. 3 years later, in 1999, Beaucoup Fish album arrives, and they've gone and done it again. Brilliant album, you know, and atmospheric D&B and progressive house were club favourites at the time, and Underworld kind of tapped into that atmospheric sound whilst keeping that up-tempo beat. And chill out compilation albums would feature tracks like Cups and Push Downstairs, where simultaneously like DJs in Ibiza blasting out Kittens or King of Snake, or a techno club might be playing Mona, you know, which has one of those kind of film-like epilogues Underworld were known for, similar to Skyscraper I Love You. In my opinion, this is where Underworld, you know, it's part of their history where they're just in full bloom of confidence. I mean, it was kind of impossible to beat, but they do match it, which I'll get onto. Now, I've never been a major fan of live albums, but Everything, which was a live album that Underworld brought out in the year 2000, where they played live in Brussels, that changed my mind. You know, it was such a top selection of their tracks. And if you hadn't heard much of Underworld up until this point, it was just the perfect advert for them as an introduction to them. Even better than this. In 2002, 100 Days Off was released, and Darren Emerson had left the group at this point, and they were down to a duo. Without taking anything away from Emerson, the album was a complete success, just like their previous releases. And 4 huge standout tracks for me were 2 Months Off, Twist, Sola, Sistim, and Lootin'. And you start to feel with confidence at this point that any project they put out will just bring moments of bliss for the ears. In 2007, Oblivion with Bells was released, and believe it or not, I think this is a contender to be their best album today. Now, it might not have so many individual tracks that are standouts, but there's a quality to this album that can't be overlooked. Hyde's lyrics are at their best on this album for me, and Smith shows what a musical genius he is. Just check out Beautiful Burnout, which to me just sums up Underworld in one track. In 2010, they released the album Barking, and they had some collaborations on that album, notably High Contrast, who I'm a big fan of. Also Paul Van Dyke and Mark Knight were on that album. There were some brilliant tracks. It was much more dance floor focused, and it was a solid album, but not one I go back to as much as the others. But take nothing away from it, it was a solid album. And after the album Barking in 2010, it was going to be a busy spell for Underworld. They rejoined forces with Danny Boyle and really did the Frankenstein show at the Royal National Theatre. They worked with Danny Boyle on the musical direction of the 2012 opening Summer Olympics ceremony. Smith went off to do solo projects with Danny Boyle, soundtracks. Hyde linked up with some projects with Brian Eno. They released their anthology, which was a compilation of tracks from 92 to 2012. I could go on a lot more about Underworld, what they've done since. But like I say, this is an introduction to Underworld, and I'd like to include their prominent years for me, which was their most potent time. And who knows, maybe their best is yet to come, because Underworld, as ever, are always unpredictable. They released Barbara, We Face a Shining Future album back in 2016, I believe. And they released a Drift series, which had 50 odd tracks on it. Again, prolific. Great music on there. So many good tracks. But I can't go into all of it here. Maybe another time, maybe a later date. So go check them out. And there's up or down tempo track somewhere there for anyone. So here's my top 10. And the reason I come about these tracks to be in the top 10 is really just the 10 tracks that I probably played the most, that are just on heavy rotation, take a very long time to get tired of. That's how I came about these 10. So hopefully you'll feel the same way. Mona is a techno thumper.